All right. Yes, what Darrell was saying is very true. Everybody around me knows me as Benny's brother. In fact, I have a Briarwood name tag that just says Benny's brother on it. And probably at least twice a week, if I'm walking down the halls of Briarwood, someone will pass me and they'll just say, "Hi, Benny," because they can't associate me without thinking of Benny. And of course, I was used to that. When I first moved to moved from South Africa to the United States 22 years ago, I had to make a trip to California for something. I forget what it was, but I'd only been in the country about 6 months. And I was coming back from California, and the plane stopped in Dallas to let some people off and other people on. And as people were getting on, a guy was walking down the aisle, and he stopped where I was sitting, and he looked down at me, and he said, "Are you Benny's brother?" It was in Dallas, but he was a Briarwood guy that knew me as Benny's brother. And I was used to that because the church that we attended in South Africa, my wife was the song leader for the church. It was a big church, about 2,000, 2,400 people. And so everybody knew her. And I would frequently have people stop me in the grocery store and say, "I know you, you're Jan's husband." So I had a Jan's husband name tag made there as well. So I do have a name, but people just know me as somebody else's brother or husband or whatever. God gives us answers to common questions and common issues of life that we have to deal with, but a lot of people, unfortunately, don't want his answers. Romans 1 talks about that, the fact that people suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And one of the things we're going to talk a little bit about today, which our first song was about, is about hope, because a lot of people are lacking hope. And the reason we had the particular opening verses that we had read from Psalm, I wanted to go back to that. It's on your back of your program, I guess. God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face to shine upon us. That's a prayer that we like to give to God. We want God to bless us, right? But, if it doesn't end there, it tells us the why he wants to bless us. Look at the very next word is that. In other words, there's a reason that we should want God to bless us as his people. Why? That your way may be known on earth. In other words, people should see our lives and the blessings that we experience from God. They should see that. And your saving power among all nations. So in other words, the blessings that we have should lead to people knowing about the Lord. So hope is an interesting word. It's one that has a lot of uses and meanings. Some people would say things like, "I hope my team wins this week." I went to Mississippi State, so that's a hope that is usually dashed. I think we won 2 games out of 12 this year. I hope my daughter gets a scholarship to college. I remember having that hope when I was facing college expenses. I hope the diagnosis from my doctor is good. I hope the stock market doesn't crash. We use hope in so many different ways, but in all of those examples, there is an element of uncertainty. In other words, there's some things we're not sure about, and so we say we hope this or that will happen. It's the way we use it oftentimes, it's more like wishful thinking. But that's not really what hope in the biblical sense is, as we're going to see. And we need to think about not just in trivial issues like the ones I just mentioned, but sometimes for important issues as well. I've heard several people say, "I hope the war in Israel right now doesn't become World War III. Well, we all hope that, but we have no control over that. I hope our country returns to some sanity and biblical values in the future. I hope there is an afterlife in heaven and that I'll make it there. I've heard people say similar things. I hope I can make some good friends who will genuinely care for me. According to a recent survey that was done by the Gallup organization, and they did this survey in 140 countries, not just here in the United States. They found that 1 in 4 people worldwide feel lonely or very lonely. And I remember when I had just come out of college and I was at a conference, and there was a man speaking there who was a psychiatrist in Chicago, which at the time was the second largest city in America. And he said the number one problem he faces when people come to him is loneliness. So just having a lot of people around is not a cure to loneliness. There's a lack of really solid relationships. And research has shown that loneliness is one of those things that's associated with a lot of physical and mental stress in people's lives. And people experience that a whole lot. It's interesting that we people are so connected through things like Facebook and Instagram and other online media, and yet many of those relationships are so superficial that people can have hundreds of, quote, friends on Facebook and still feel lonely because they don't have the personal relationships. And so what I found is people all around us are going through difficult times, and a lot of times we're not aware of that. We just see them and we think they're fine. I remember a man that was one of our mentors when we were in Africa named Henry Brandt. He was a psychologist, and he said one time he was sitting in church and the offering was being taken up, and there was one of the deacons was taking up the offering and passing the plate around, and the person sitting next to him said, "Look at that man taking up the offering. He is just one of the happiest, godliest men I know." And Dr. Brandt was thinking to himself, actually, that man's one of my clients, and he's one of the saddest, most frustrated men in the world. But we can put on a front and make people think that we're doing fine. And a lot of times people are unwilling to let us know that they're lacking in hope. Hope is a powerful emotion. It's something that makes a big difference in our lives when we're facing difficult circumstances. I remember reading a book when I was in college by Viktor Frankl, who was a Jewish man that was imprisoned in one of the concentration camps during World War II. And he said the thing that kept him alive when others were dying around him was the hope that he was going to see his family again when this all ended. And it was that hope that got him through it. Now, the sad ending of the story was once he got out, he found he was the only member of his family who survived. But it got him through that difficult time. And so hope can be very powerful. So what is hope from a biblical point of view? You know, this Christmas we'll probably hear the song "O Holy Night" many times, and there's a little phrase in it that says, "A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices." But what I found is without hope, the weary world does not rejoice. In fact, a lot of people are looking for other things to satisfy. They're not looking for the hope of Jesus Christ to satisfy their lives. They're looking for possessions. They're looking for relationships. They're looking for things that are temporal to satisfy them, which do not. And so we can expect that many of our neighbors, many people that we know, that we encounter in restaurants, grocery stores, wherever we go, are frustrated and are without hope. And you know, here's an interesting thing that another study has discovered, is that one of the times that people have the worst time, the most difficult time emotionally with their lack of hope is after Christmas. Because there's something about the Christmas season that's supposed to be festive, joyful. A lot of songs are about joy, and there's music, there's upbeat music playing, and it's supposed to be a happy time. Gifts are given out. But the reality is all of that is very superficial to many people, and that's all they've got. And so we can expect that after Christmas, a lot of people are going to find that the gifts they received, the fun that they had, didn't give them the satisfaction that they really want and need. And that's really because what they're missing is Jesus. Jesus is the only one who can provide what we really need. He provides the inner resource, the inner hope and joy and stability that we all need. So if you have friends, neighbors that demonstrate that, if you happen to see that after Christmas, then that's a good time to have a conversation with them and to encourage hope. We've got a little Bible study course that I've been sharing with other people called Hope Explored, and it's a 3-week study that can be done with people that are not experiencing hope in their life, that are feeling depressed. It's a good time. But from that little course, I just want to share something with you because I thought it was really good when I went through it. It gave a biblical definition of hope. So here's what it is: a joyful expectation for the future based on true events in the past, which changes everything about my present. So what I want us to do is I want us to unpack that statement a little bit. We'll go back through it and talk about it. First, a joyful expectation for the future. You know, as believers, we look forward to the return of Christ and our homegoing, whichever comes first. And so for us, the future is not bleak. We have something to look forward to. That's why hope is a joyful expectation for the future. And then that little statement said it's based on true events in the past. Think about what some of those events are. Well, the perfect life of Christ, he lived a perfect life for us. He died on the cross for us. He rose from the dead for us. And he has guaranteed that we will have eternal life forever. So he has done things which are of a historical nature. And so that's why we say that hope is based on true events of the past. And then the last part of that statement was that it changes everything about my present. In other words, if we really believe the first two things, if we really believe that Jesus died for us and rose again and has promised us eternal life, and we really believe, therefore, there is an expectation for the future, then it should change everything about our daily lives. If you think about it, hope is an emotion and a way of thinking that changes nothing about our circumstances, but it changes everything because it's a totally different mindset. Doesn't matter what's going on in our lives, God gives us hope. I remember when Daryl mentioned my mom. She was a real godly lady. Everyone loved her. And it was just 3 years ago in November that she was deteriorating, and she was in an assisted living home really near me, and I'd go by to see her every day. And she was the most joyful person. She'd been telling us for about 3 or 4 years that she was ready to go to heaven and see Jesus and see my dad who's there. And my wife would say to her, "Oh, but we'll miss you so much." And she said, "Oh, you'll get over it." The idea of dying did not scare her. She had a hope for the future. And so all the people that would come in, the nurses, the doctors, the helpers at the assisted living people, they couldn't believe how joyful this lady was. She had an expectation for the future because she believed these things to be true. So her circumstances were not good. She was bedridden for the last, month and a half, 2 months. She couldn't get out of bed at all. That's not a nice situation to be in. But it didn't change her demeanor, didn't change her inner hope. So hope is something that is beyond what our circumstances that we're in. That's good news. And so I'd like us to look a little bit about how biblical hope can help us reaching out to others at Christmas who are without hope. Pastor Reeder of Briarwood used to say that conversion happens in a moment. There's a moment when we're converted to Christ. But evangelism itself is a process. It doesn't just happen in a moment. It's a process that leads to that moment of conversion. And so that process can sometimes take quite a while. It could be days, months, or even years. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. First of all, there's 5 ways that we could view the world from a worldview point of view. Some people think that things are getting worse in the world. Others say things are getting better. Some say things are going round in a circle. Everything goes round and round and round. That's actually a mindset from the Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism. And then some people think that things are simply random. There's no purpose to what happens in life. There are many atheistic scientists who believe that everything is random. But the Christian worldview, which is different, is linear. It has a beginning, it has an end. We believe that God started it. There was a beginning point to this world, which he created. Then he created humans on this earth. And there's going to come a time when everything is going to be culminated. We believe that. We believe the creation, fall, redemption, and the restoration is coming. And that's good news. That's something to look forward to. And so the Christian worldview is much more attractive to many people once they understand it. A lot of people don't understand it. But once they do, I believe they are attracted by it. But on a personal level, think about this. Where is your life going? Is it founded on Jesus Christ and the eternal truths that he and his apostles taught? If it is, you have reason for hope. In Isaiah 9, a passage that I'm sure you'll hear at Christmas time, says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned." That was a message of hope to the people in Isaiah's day. It's still a message of hope to us today, and that's why we hear it repeated. Let me ask you this. Have you ever tried to sell something to someone that they didn't want? I had that unpleasant experience when I was a baseball player as a youth. I guess I was around 12, 13, whatever. And the baseball organization there where we played there near Woodlawn was trying to raise money. And so they required all of us to go out door to door and try to sell this product. It was a product that people didn't want. If they wanted it, there's plenty of places they could go buy it. But we each were given a target community that we had to go knock on so many doors. And I didn't sell any. I realized that sales was probably not my thing at that point. But the point is, when we try to sell people something that they don't want, it's a hard sell, right? And so let me ask you this. How would you like to try to convince someone to do a terrible job for no pay? Or how would you like to try to convince someone to be a human guinea pig for some kind of experimentation? In other words, you're going to inject them with cancer cells so you could try some experimental drugs on them. Well, both of those are ridiculous examples. Yes, if you're thinking that, they were supposed to be ridiculous examples. But unfortunately, I think that sometimes we view talking to people about Jesus in a similar way, almost as if we feel like telling them about Jesus is inflicting some great harm on them, like in those examples. That's not the way it is. It's not. You wouldn't be interested in hearing about Jesus, would you? As if we're trying to sell them something that's no good. No, just the opposite. What we're offering people in Jesus is the things we've been talking about here: eternal life, hope for the future. These are things that He offers us. We have good news to offer people. In the book of Ephesians, chapter 2, Paul mentions some of the conditions of people without Christ. He says that they are dead, that is, spiritually dead because of their trespasses and sins, that they're following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. That's referring to Satan. He says that they are living in the passions of their flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and are by nature children of wrath, that is, they're destined for wrath. And he tells them that they were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. That was his description to the Ephesians of what they were like before they were Christians. Let me ask you this. What has changed today? How are people different today than they were then? They're not. Without Christ, that's the description of every person in this world today. Doesn't matter how they live, how nice they are, how polite they are, what a nice place they have to live in, what a nice car they have to drive. People without Christ are the same today as the way Paul described them back then. And he says they have no hope. Now, I find if you ask the average person, say you're in an extended family gathering, or just someone on the street, or someone in a grocery store, do you have any hope for the future? You'll get different kinds of replies. Some people would be offended that you would even suggest that they don't have hope for the future. They would say, of course I have hope. Some people, when I've asked those kind of questions, would say things like, well, if our government doesn't have some big changes, we're doomed. The last 4 years, I would agree with them. But the point is, there's a lot of people are unwilling to admit that they don't really have hope in their heart. This is what I found. A lot of times they don't have any real, true, solid hope because they don't know Jesus Christ, but they're unwilling to acknowledge and admit that they're really without hope in this world. They're being consumed by entertainment. They're entertaining themselves to death to try to give them something to live for, some way to give them a laugh, or they're addicted to sex or drugs or alcohol or their money or something like that. Occasionally, I find that a person is honest enough to tell me about their anxieties and their lack of hope. I remember when I was working on campus in South Africa, one of the universities there, and I was with my friend Gary, who worked with me, and we had an hour. We didn't have anything to do for that hour, so we said, well, let's just go out on the campus and see if we can find a guy doing nothing and talk to him about Christ. And so we prayed and we turned around, and as soon as we turned around, there was a guy standing about as far from me as Steve is sitting back there in the back, and young, red-headed looking guy. And so we walked up to him and said, hey, could we have a few minutes of your time? And he said, sure. And we said, well, we'd like to talk to you about your spiritual life. He said, okay. And we said, what's your name? Rob. Okay. And so we started talking to him. And we had a little booklet called The 4 Spiritual Laws that we went through with him. We got to a place in the 4 spiritual laws where he had to identify whether he had Christ in his life or whether he did not. And he said he did not. Okay. So we turned the page of the book, and it has, here's a prayer that you could pray if you'd like to receive Christ. Would you like to do that? He said, yes. And I thought, this is sort of progressing the way it does in a training seminar where it's kind of a made-up situation. This is too easy. you know? And so I said, well, are you sure you'd like to do this? Yes, he'd like to do this. So we prayed with him, and he asked Christ to come into his life. And then the next page of the book had a question, something like, how do you know that Christ has answered your prayer and he's come into your life? And he said, well, first of all, because he said, I'm a freshman here at the university. And he said, I've been feeling very lonely recently and just very lost and directionless in life. And so he said, last week I prayed and I said, God, if you're there, send someone to talk to me because I need help. And he said, when you guys walked up and started talking, I knew this was an answer to my prayer. Well, you know, I've been sharing my faith now for about 52 years, and I could probably count on one hand how many times I've had people that open, that ready to want to receive Christ and who are willing to admit how messed up their life was without Christ. It happens occasionally, but not usually the very first time you meet a person. But sometimes it does. But what I do find is people are hurting badly, and a lot of them just don't want to admit it. But sometimes they will. One of the things I was just telling the elders that I started doing in the last few months is going over to the Shelby County Jail there in Columbiana and meeting with men. And a few weeks ago, I went into a cell block that I hadn't been in a while, and there was a guy there that was new, had not been in since, had not been there the last time I'd been there. We'll call him Brendan, and for anonymity. And so as we started talking, some of the guys had things they needed to go and do, and so they got up and moved off. And so it turned out it was just me and this Brendan guy and another fella who was kind of quiet. And Brendan just opened up and started telling me about his life. He said, I wasn't here the last time you were here, but this is my 4th time in here. He said, I've been to prison twice, and my wife has been to prison twice. And he just started telling me, pouring out the heartache of his life to me. And he said, I really want things to be different when I get out this time. And he said, I don't know how, but he said, I'm hoping God can help me. And so we had a great time in the Word, and we spent time together for the next 4 weeks. I'd go back each week and spend time with him. He's now out in rehab. Drugs was his problem. And so he's hoping to get free of that. But sometimes people will just open up when we don't even know them, like this guy did, and just share their difficulties with us. But it's not that common. I do remember when I was in South Africa, there was a guy named Mark that came to one of our meetings. And my plan, it was a businessman's meeting, and it was real low key. It wasn't a real heavy evangelistic meeting. It was more of a discussion. But we'd have businessmen would come to that meeting, and then as a result of being in the meeting, I would then say to them, hey, let's get together for coffee sometime or lunch, and it would give me an opportunity to talk to them one-on-one and sometimes share the gospel. So I asked this guy, Mark, if he'd like to get together, and he said yes. And he said, I'd like to talk to you about my spiritual life. And I thought, oh, that was usually going to be my statement to say, I'd like to talk to you about your spiritual life. But he wanted to talk about it. And he told me he hadn't been to church since he was 5 years old. He was 30 at the time. But within a few weeks of thinking about these things, we shared the gospel. I shared the gospel with him. And he took the little booklet that I gave him, shared it with his wife, kept coming to our meetings, kept talking to other men. It only took about 3 weeks for him to decide this is what he needed, and he came to faith in Christ. It all started with him just coming to a meeting like that. Well, I want us to wrap up now as we look at Ephesians chapter 6. That was the passage listed in your bulletin that we're going to look at today. And so there's an important little section here in this book that I want us to focus on. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 18 and 20. You may be familiar with the first part of Ephesians 6, where Paul is talking about the spiritual warfare that we're involved in against the devil and his demons. And we're not going to get into that today. But what I do want us to do is look at the fact that we are engaged in a spiritual battle. I think you all know that, and how we can use this in our witnessing for Christ. Because the thing is, the spiritual battle is not only raging against us as believers, but it's also something that is keeping unbelievers from believing the good news. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4, Paul wrote, in their case, the God, that is unbelievers, in their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So Satan has blinded their eyes. He does not want unbelievers to see the truth. And he has all kinds of schemes and things that he does. A book that I've been studying with my brother recently is called Precious remedies against Satan's devices. Satan has all kinds of schemes and devices to try to keep unbelievers from understanding the gospel. Then he has other schemes and devices that he uses against us as believers to keep us from enjoying our walk with the Lord. And one of the things in there, the author Thomas Brooks wrote this: "Oh, the blindness of mind, the hardness of heart that those souls are given up to, who in the eye of the world are reputed the most happy men, because they are not outwardly afflicted and plagued as other men. Oh, friends, it would be better that all the temporal plagues that ever befell the children of men since the fall of Adam should at once meet upon your body, than that you should be given up to the least spiritual plagues, to the least measure of spiritual blindness or spiritual hardness of heart." Yes, there are people that have hard hearts out there. They are blind. And so Paul writes in regards to this spiritual battle, and he asks those in Ephesus to pray. Listen, look at verse 18. "Praying at all times in the Spirit, with all prayer and supplication, to that end keep alert with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints, and also for me, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly as I ought to speak." So notice he says, not only making supplication for all the saints. That's saying pray for one another. He's telling us, just like Daryl prayed for the congregation here, we pray for one another. That's part of it. But then he says, and also for me. What does he mean, also for me? He means pray for me. That's the title of this message. Pray for me. Paul says, pray for me. What does he ask us to pray for him? That I may be bold to proclaim the gospel. When I think about that, I think, wait a minute, Paul needed boldness? I mean, if anybody didn't seem to need boldness, it was Paul. I mean, he'd go anywhere and share the gospel. He got beaten, with rods and stoned and everything else, and he just got right up and kept going, and he's asking for prayer, for boldness. He doesn't seem to be the guy that needs it. I seem to be the one that needs it. I'm so timid and shy, it's hard for me to get those conversations started. But Paul is asking for us to pray for him for boldness. We all need that prayer. He says, I'm an ambassador in chains. In other words, even when he was in prison, he saw himself as representing God. And the fact is, we are also all representing God all the time, whether we realize it or not. And Paul says, pray that I will declare it boldly as I ought to speak. Paul knew that he ought to be sharing the gospel with people. And the same is true for us. We ought to speak God's words to people. And there are many opportunities for people to hear the gospel, especially during this Advent season that we're now entering. Just the fact that there are decorations and music in all the stores, everywhere you go, there's a reminder that there's something happening. It's Christmas. And so there's many opportunities. And we need to think about how we can engage people with the gospel during this time. And one of the things that I found the best is to use questions. Instead of preaching at people, it's just ask questions. Questions are disarming, and they show an interest in the other person's viewpoint and leads to further conversation. And so some years ago, I asked a young man who was not a Christian if he liked classical music. This is a medical student that I knew, and I said, do you like classical music? He said, oh yeah, I love classical music. Well, I happen to know that coming up in a couple of weeks, Briarwood was going to have a Christmas concert which featured classical music. So I invited him to go to that. He was not a Christian. He went to it. He loved it. He came every year for the next several years. It took 3 years of relationship with this guy before he came to Christ. But there's just, I found out what he was interested in by asking him that question and then finding an opportunity that was right for him. About a year ago, we had a man doing some remodeling work in our house because of a water leak that we had. And so one day I asked him a real simple question that someone suggested that I ask. And here's the question. Do you celebrate Christmas? Now just think about it. That's not really a loaded question. That can be a very neutral question in our society today because it's so secularized. There's a lot of ways people could answer that. They could say, well, we put up lights in a tree, or we give gifts to family. Some people might say, well, I don't know if it's a celebration or just a commercial enterprise that keeps us busy and spends our money. People have a lot of things that they say about it. Others might be Christians, and they'll reveal that. Yes, it's a great time to focus on Jesus coming into the world for me. But the question itself is not necessarily a spiritual question. It's just people can answer it however they want. And there are many people who have a celebration at Christmas that has nothing to do with Christ. So it's not a hard question to ask people. It's not hard for them to answer. But I asked this guy, this man who was working on our bathroom, if he celebrated Christmas. And his answer was, nah, to me, it's like believing in the Easter Bunny. It's just a bunch of made-up stories. So where do you go with that, huh? I realized there was some follow-up conversation needed. And so sometimes we can ask other questions, like if we get something really radical like that guy said, like, well, isn't it possible that you have misunderstood and that it's not just a bunch of made-up stories? Is it possible? In other words, make him think about it. And but because he didn't seem to be all that open, I didn't want to invite him to an event. But I just read a little booklet called "Is Christmas Unbelievable?" You can read it in one sitting. It's not that long. But here's the questions that it answers from a historical point of view. Was Jesus even a real person? That's one of the chapters. Can we take the Gospels seriously? It's another chapter. Another one, how can you believe in a virgin birth? And then finally, why does it matter? So I thought, this would be a great book to give this guy that's working on my house. And so I made a little Christmas bag up for him, Christmas gift, and I gave him that and sent it to him. And he texted me a response. Here's what he said: I will absolutely read it. That's a very thoughtful gift. Well, I've lost track of this guy now. I've tried to reach out to him, but unsuccessfully. But you know, the thing is, it's God's job to convert people. We just need to be willing to be used by him. And so I find asking that simple question, do you celebrate Christmas, gives us an opportunity to just see if people are interested at all. And it just starts a conversation. And that's what we need to be about doing. Paul wrote in Romans 7, the good that I want to do, I don't do. That's a struggle that he had. It's a struggle that we all have. It's a problem. We have good intentions, but they don't always result in great actions. And so I do have a very specific application for you from the message today. And I would like you to do this. I'd like you to ask someone, not your spouse, someone else, a friend, to pray for you. Just as Paul said, pray for me. Ask someone to be your accountability partner for the next month to pray for you. What are they going to pray for you? They're going to pray for you, and they're also going to hold you accountable by each week asking you, have you started a spiritual conversation? And you just use that simple question, do you celebrate Christmas? Just once a week. I'm not asking for too much. I'm not asking you to do this 5 times a day. Once a week, ask someone, do you celebrate Christmas? And just see where it leads. Some of those conversations will lead nowhere. That's okay. God's the one it's his responsibility. But we have to make ourselves available. And so just asking a simple question like that. I preached a similar message to this a year ago at Briarwood. And I told people that same thing. Ask that question. I can't tell you how many people came up to me in January or February and said, I used that question. And I got so many good conversations going with people, just asking them, do you celebrate Christmas? So I say, try it. You'll like it. If they're positive about Christmas, they'll just say, oh yeah, and it'll have a good conversation. If they're not, if they're negative, like the guy that was working on my house, that's okay. Don't let that throw you. Just ask people the question and see where it goes. See what God does. God wants people to experience his love and his mercy and his hope. And we are the ones that are going to be used to do that. Well, let's pray. Lord, thank you for loving us. Thank you for giving us the greatest news ever told. And we want you to use us to share that good news with other people. And I pray that you would do that in Jesus' name. Amen. Is the benediction? Okay, stand for the benediction. Now may the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the eternal covenant, equip you with everything good, that you may do his will, working in us that which is pleasing in his sight, through Jesus Christ, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen.
Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. Peace be to you. Thank you so much.
All right, well, 11:25. Good.